Good evening. My name is Brandon Zealy. I'd like to take just a few minutes to discuss different styles of leadership and communication. Maybe find out if one method is better than the other. If there are some characteristics and personality traits of a leader that are more effective than some. For this particular discussion, I decided to pick two individuals, Steve Jobs and Mark Cuban, both very successful people. They started out in middle class working families. Steve Jobs, he co-founded a technology company known as Apple, known for Apple computers and iPhones and other really big achievements throughout his time. Mark Cuban, he started out as a small entrepreneur and started working for a small business called Your Business Software. He sold computers and other software, and he would even install it for people. He would move on from this and create his own business called Micro Solutions. He would build this company from the ground up and eventually make it so big that he would sell it for $6 million. Cuban would keep 1/3 of this, and that's when he really started making big investments and made a big name for himself. Now, there are two particular traits that I really want to talk about that some would say are very important for a leader or for leadership, and this is charisma and honesty. Now, charisma, it's important to be charismatic to an audience, but it's also important to be charismatic to your peers and to your coworkers. Jobs definitely catered to an audience. He was very charismatic. Apple would use him during launches to kind of be the face. He would be the one up on stage introducing a product, and the consumers, they loved him. They kind of saw him as being bigger than life. But we would then come to find out that that wasn't necessarily the case to his coworkers. Some people that worked with Jobs would say that he was a real perfectionist and he was very demanding, that things would either be done his way or the highway. This would eventually lead to him being fired from the company that he co founded in the mid 1980s. When Apple started not do so well, they would hire him back and he would retain his role as CEO, but he still would keep that attitude, his way or the highway, and it was even kind of worsened after that. Now, to move on, Cuban, his charisma is a lot different. He's a little bit more down to earth. When he started Micro Solutions, a lot of his clients followed him into that endeavor, not really knowing where it was going. But they would say that they loved working with Mark Cuban, that he was a pleasure to work with. So it would kind of you can kind of assume that his charisma that he had to audiences kind of also filtered down and into his business, into his employees, into his companies. If you watch him during an interview, he's very laid back, very down to earth. And so when you compare Steve Jobs and Mark Cuban, they both really appealed to an audience, to a consumer, but who really kind of stayed that way within the company. And as a coworker, who would you really rather work for, Jobs or Cuban? The second part that I want to talk about is honesty and being outspoken. Um, Once Mark Cuban started making a lot of his money, he ended up buying an NBA team called the Dallas Mavericks. And he really would turn that franchise around. But what he was really known for is accruing all the fines for, speaking out against NBA officials and the NBA commissioner. He wouldn't hold back. And, he really didn't care about the repercussions like, being fined. He's accrued over $1 million in fines. But what he really cared about was, being the voice for his NBA team. And he's kind of the same way with his companies. He really wants to make sure that people can rely on him. Jobs is the same way. He was very honest. Some would actually say he was brutally honest. He would be the first one to tell his coworkers that a product that their work with sucked. He would tell them that it sucked. Steve Wozniak, which was also the co-founder of Apple, he would kind of describe Steve Jobs as almost terrorizing his employees. Steve Jobs said that his method was being so honest that he would weed out the employees that weren't as honest. And, this would really create a very loyal work atmosphere, that the employees that stayed around were the loyal ones. So, but it's kind of hard to say which method is better. Cuban speaking out against officials, or Jobs speaking out against his coworkers. Where do you really draw the line? But both of them, it obviously did well for the two of them. And it's hard to judge which which method is better? Cuban's kind of laid back, being, down to earth, or Steve Jobs, perfectionist, his way or the highway. Both of them are very successful. Um, the Dallas Mavericks have won a national champion, or NBA championship under Cuban's ownership, and Cuban is also almost worth over $1 billion now. Steve Jobs, he turned Apple around and created them to be the thriving company that they are now. And when Steve Jobs died, he was worth over $1 billion. But it's hard to say, money doesn't necessarily say which method is better. Money doesn't, that's not the label for a great leader. So when addressing the two, the main point is that they both had a style that reflected their personality. Even though this kind of information would claim that Cuban was the better leader, that his leadership method, finding that balance between, being charismatic to your peers and also to an audience, some would say that that's better. But there are a lot of people who have worked with Steve Jobs that, would say that they, even though Steve Jobs was demanding, that they wouldn't have worked for anyone else. That, even some of the most kind leaders, they would have preferred to have stayed with Jobs. So it's hard to say which one was better, but the thing is, they both capitalize on their strength. They both know what their strengths are. And I think that being a good leader, that's really the main thing to know. What are your strengths and how to capitalize them? And I think that's something that both Mark Cuban and Steve Jobs have done. Thank you.